So, big question, why the leopard? Why study this species? From my perspective, other than for the way it looks and how interesting it is, there's obviously more to its beauty. And that's often what, everyone asks, why the leopard, right? So many of you may already know these terms have now become quite common. Flagships and umbrella. Attention are what flagship species are really. The term comes from the flag that's at the head of the mast of a ship. And often, there's specific particular kinds of species that are flagships. And they do attract a lot of attention, but there's other reasons other than just the fact that they attract attention as well, because they can, garner much more support for other species that unfortunately don't get the support they should get. So also often both flagships and umbrellas are wide-ranging species. And for wide-ranging species, usually they're quite large species, often smaller species. If they're smaller than 25 grams, for example, they're always restricted, range-restricted species, usually. So using them as conservation proxies, really, having these wide-ranging charismatic species is of value. Now, as you can see from the visual there, they're holding an umbrella, and literally that's what it is. An umbrella species means that it is a species that's often small in number, but exerts a much wider influence on the landscape than its numbers because it's wide-ranging. So it, like an umbrella, like we open up an umbrella and there's a space for us, whether it's sun or rain, these species also have a tendency and the ability to do that for a multitude of other species underneath its ecological umbrella, hence that term. So often, again, flagships and umbrella species are also apex predators because, as many of us know how the food chain is, their numbers are less, but their influence is wide and higher. So these apex predators are often key species in certain ecosystems where they are, but because they also range quite far and wide, they encompass a much larger area than their actual numbers would indicate. So they really fulfill ideal flagship and umbrella roles. And of course, the classic big cats, the tiger, the lion, the jaguar, and the snow leopard, which actually isn't a big cat. And it should be the clouded leopard that's there, because the clouded leopard is the other big cat. But the reason the snow leopard is there is because its influence in particular habitats, like in the high mountains and the snow passes, it kind of plays that role. It's an extremely good flagship and umbrella species in those habitats. Hence, it goes as one of these classic big cats. And of course, the leopard, who we will be talking about today. So let's get into the leopard. What does the leopard mean to us? We talked about, flagships being able to garner interest, right? So that's where this all comes in. Ecologically, we've already spoken about the fact that it's wide-ranging, it's a top predator, and it's an umbrella species. So already it has its import when it comes to an ecological perspective. Historically, here in Sri Lanka, it's the only top predator that we have had in this on this island for over 10,000 millennia. And it has evolved as such. It has evolved without competition. And that's what intrigued means. It means that it has no competition of its guild. So of another carnivore, another predator, that it's same guild, as it was, same size and so on. And this is the only place really on this planet where this has occurred. Now, Java, for example, currently also has only the leopard, but until very recently, it had the Javan tiger, which is now sadly extinct. Whereas in Sri Lanka, this is one of the few places, actually the only place, where we have only had one top predator surviving and evolving as a solitary predator, apex predator. What about culturally? And I think this is reflected culturally as well, because if you look at some of the district maps going all the way back, you do find a spotted cat on the Western Province flag, for example, Southwestern Province flags. And if you look at a lot of, drawings, carvings, cave carvings, old texts, you will see that always the cat is spotted, whatever it's spotted. Even the term, Divya is about a marked cat. It's a marked cat. That's what it means, really. So you can see that obviously culturally also it's shown that there has been a marked cat on this island. Of course, intrinsically, it has its own value. Like I said earlier, it's very elusive. It's got fantastic characteristics to it. It's an amazing looking animal, which feeds into nowadays so many people, wanting to photograph it. Earlier before, there was artwork that depicted all of this. And of course, there is economic value as well, which we all know today is because of tourism. Double-edged sword there, of course, but we're not talking about that today. But basically just showing that there is a varied value to this particular big cat. Now, I'm going to talk about this again to just contextualize it. This was a study that was done some time ago, looking at a variety of cat species to understand how it could be used for conservation as a proxy. And the term that is used is the conservation priority score. Now, if you look here, it's a bunch of different cats that were used. It was a global study where they asked humans, of course, people around the world, to rate or to score all of these cats. And the leopard came as 5th here, as you can see. But if you were to add its umbrella score, which as I mentioned earlier, was its ability as a proxy for large-scale conservation, it immediately pops up by a lot, as you can see right here. So the leopard holds this amazing ability, therefore, as we can see from this particular study anyway, to be an ideal umbrella species for conservation. So this was then heat mapped across the globe where there are these cats, and the scores here that you see, NCP score and NCL score. The NCP is the National Conservation Priority, and the NCL is the National Conservation Likelihood. I think that's self-explanatory. But when you look at where Sri Lanka is, we fare very well on both scores. We're on the top right quadrant, meaning that using the leopard here as a national conservation priority is very high. And the likelihood that we would do this is also very high. So again, there's one of the answers to why the leopard. How can we harvest this somehow, not just for, protecting the leopard, saving the leopard, but as a much more far and wide situation and solution for landscape level conservation and all of the other biodiversity that sits below that umbrella. So we talked about the umbrella aspect of it, right? But what are some of the nitty-gritties of this? Now, the leopard is one of the most adaptable of the big cats, and it is literally still luckily found across all habitat types, from the high mountain passes down to the ocean, down to the arid, down to the wet. It's still very much present. It's in 65 countries across most of the old world. Obviously, there's no leopards in the new world. The jaguar is there. So it's still present in 65 countries. And its ability to live in proximity to humans and human habitation is actually quite remarkable. These are just some examples that we always use. Johannesburg is one of the examples in one of the African countries that has leopards living within and very close to the city. Nairobi is another one in Africa. Here in the Asian continent, we've got Mumbai as our neighbor. I'm sure many of you would have heard of Sanjay Gandhi National Park and the leopards there. Pretty amazing how adaptable they are. They actually survive solely and primarily on domestic dogs, mostly, and cats. They don't really have wild prey. But the community have got used to it, and they have actually harnessed them as conservation champions for them. And of course, here in Sri Lanka, in Kandy, we have a population that actually sits within the city limits. So they're extremely adaptable, and mostly people don't really know this, and they are able to just survive without too much of issue. However, for all of this, it has lost a lot of its global range. So that is still ongoing as well. And it remains as vulnerable throughout its international range. So this is what it shows. The gray that you are seeing in the background there is its historical range, where it used to roam globally. And then the color that you see there, the dark green is where it is present today, the light green where it's possibly present, the orange where it's possibly gone, but we don't know for sure. And like I mentioned, the gray is where it used to be. So as you can see, if you look here in closer to home for us in the Asian subcontinent, you can see how patchy it is. Very, very patchy. So very small pockets. Sri Lanka, I don't know if you can see there, I'll show you a better map as we go. At least we still have some contiguous area, which, however, we're finding is going fast. So this is all something to keep in mind as we go through some of the stuff I'll present that we're doing. Also, as you know, or may not know, that there are 9 subspecies of leopards, which are shown over there. And obviously the Sri Lankan leopard is one of those subspecies. And each subspecies is individually assessed. So we can actually, which is a really good thing, so that we can take into account for each subspecies in each of its ranges, what's actually happening on the ground. So what about here, Sri Lanka? Why is our island leopard special? We already spoke about the fact that it's the only place on Earth that has evolved as one single top carnivore. What about all those criteria, right? Talked about it being present all over. So in Sri Lanka, I always use this and I say that it truly is the king of our jungles. We don't have a lion, so there is no such, it is the actual apex king of our jungles. And I've already said that this is one of the only places where this has occurred. But still, because even though we have all of this, all these reasons, and it's still present, its population numbers are not tremendous, as you can see. And it remains as vulnerable today. We just finished the red listing. We had requested for a 5-year renewal of our subspecies. It's usually every 10 years because it was downgraded from endangered to vulnerable. So we requested for a quicker review. It is still staying as vulnerable. And in 2030, we will reassess and see what's happening. So here it fulfills all of the criteria. I hope you can see here. This hatch bit is its current range. And you can see all the habitat types behind it. That's the dry zone, wet zone, montane, all of our habitat types. And you can see that it's still pretty much extends throughout the island, except of course for where we sit today, the western part of the western province, because obviously it's highly human habitated. So direct, reason here why it's not here. So as a result, even here on this island, it still fulfills that role of an umbrella species because of all of these facts, all of these attributes that it still holds true here in Sri Lanka as well. This is an overlay of our protected areas. The dark green is basically our national parks, which is high level of protection, and the light green are our sanctuaries and other protected areas, which has a second tier of protection. This map is actually from a study we did a little while ago. It was a big data-driven landscape level study that we did together with Oxford University's Wild Crew. And what we did is the presence of leopards. And then that was also modeled and projected. And what it was produced, the results were that it was level of protection. So how well protected were our particular landscapes? Patch size of the forest or the wilderness area and connectivity. Those were the 3 main big things. Now it seems, yeah, sure, obvious, right? In a way, you think wildlife requires forest and so much. But how does this now work on the ground? How do we actually make that theoretical? Okay, so the model actually was fed data and then it was made to project. And those were the 3 variables that came forward. So hence our work is now based sort of on that. and looking at how on the ground this is actually going to work. So we come back to this whole landscape level conservation scenario here for Sri Lanka. Okay, so let's look a little bit at how the land in Sri Lanka has been traditionally as well as still today. As you all know, we're still 80% rural. So the land still looks not that different. We've got protected areas, 2 protected areas, let's say. We've got small towns, we've got cities, and in between all of that is agricultural land. We're 80% agriculture based, right? So this is what the island looks like really from that perspective, if you're looking at landscape level. Now, if a leopard, let's say living in a protected area down here in the southwest, needs to go out, right? I mean, they can't only be in there. They need to go out, they need to mate, they need to find new areas, which will show you how that works. It needs to find safe passage. So if we have patches of forest, it is able to navigate through this risky environment and go to the next large protected forest. If we don't have those patches, or if the patches didn't exist, I should say, then the leopard would have to do a straight across through this extremely risky area. Additionally, we've got buffers around our protected areas, buffer zones, very gray definitions here. It's supposed to be a 1 mile zone where there's no development around our protected areas, but as many of us know, that's not the case. What is the purpose of these buffers? It is so that the size of a protected area is buffered by land so that its effective use, let's say it's 14,000 square kilometers, the buffer around it ensures that the 14,000 square kilometers is effective as an ecological unit. If the buffer doesn't exist and it's eaten up, then it needs to go in further, isn't it? Because that 14,000 square kilometers itself has to become the buffer. And so then the effective size of a protected area is much smaller. So this is what really now leads us to looking at how our work is going to overlay on this. But first, I want to just show you a little bit about the social structure of leopards and how they use the land. We looked at it theoretically, they're moving from one protected area to the other. So as many of you will know, that the first layer of a social structure of leopards, like many matrilineal species, even though it's a solitary animal, it still follows the same social structure. It's got a female, and a female's home range will be as large as it needs to be and small as it can be protected. So she will choose an area based primarily on how she can support her cubs. Enough prey for her cubs, enough water for her cubs, and so on. Next to her will be other females. Often in the case of leopards, they're related because a mother will give up some of her range to her daughter, very much like our society, our cultural situation here in Asia, very much like primates. They were mentioned, I studied primates before, and this is very interesting to see how a gregarious species like primates, as well as a solitary species like a leopard, still follow this structure, as do we as humans, especially here in our cultural context. So a male, on the other hand, bases his range on females and access to females for mating. So his is much larger because he will encompass 3 to 5 females. And added to this is the young male, the transient, who, poor fellow, gets kicked out by his mother and needs to go and find his own area. But he's got to roam far and wide in order to find his own area. And this is primarily to prevent inbreeding. We've seen this very much in the field. The mother will, after a certain time, 100% kick the male out. So these are the risky guys. They are the ones that have to navigate through that dangerous area. Okay, so this is the reason why, therefore, we said why the leopard. By understanding how leopards understand and navigate through our landscapes, through the country, we could also then utilize that for larger biodiversity conservation in that sense. Okay, it's kind of a quick fix. We don't have time. I normally have these slides where we talk about, I mean, our predecessors in the Serengeti, they had, decades luxury. It has to be quick and fast. So this is one solution, right, of how we navigate the landscape. How do we plan where and when and what we as a human species is going to do? So how does this work actually here on the ground? And I'd like to just talk about 4 of our study sites. This is where we've been working throughout the country. The bluey purple ones are where we have worked. The green ones are current. And it morphs, it changes depending on where we go and what we do and what gaps have to be filled. Sometimes we may go back to a study site if we need to answer certain things. And then sometimes we have new ones. So using some of these study sites, let's again try to understand what's going on. So Wilpattu National Park, okay, everybody knows Wilpattu National Park, our largest, oldest protected area. Keep in mind this protected area buffers how the whole landscape works. So this study was done about some years back now. This is the camera array that you're seeing, the black, that's Wilpattu border. All the different colors are GIS layers of forest, water, so on, okay? And basically what we have here is that we have population numbers, total numbers, as well as adult density numbers. So there is a different way that you take a look at this, and depending on what the answer is that you want. Usually, scientifically, for comparative purposes, internationally, we use adult density numbers. And as you can see from our study, we had densities of 10.4 per 100 kilometers square. There was another study done afterwards, Singha et al., and they had a much higher number of 80. Now, some may think, oh, that's great, there's more leopards in Leopard. But is that actually great? What's happened? This just, if you look on the side, you will see that's just how female rangers and male rangers are using Wilpattu. All right? Just gives you a quick look into that, as you can see. These are a bunch of the resident females moving through the landscape. All right. So again, this is what you're looking at is remote camera locations that had leopards in them, resident and living there. So we do have a sizable leopard population there, but both studies found that there is evidence of them actually avoiding boundaries. Okay, so as you can even see here, they're actually in the core area. Now, the roads are also sort of there, and the villus are also sort of there. There is another whole study, which I won't go into here, and that's about leapfrogging. It's about resource selection by the leopard, and are they actually choosing the prey or where the prey decides to go? Whichever way you look at it, it seems to be that leopards are actually avoiding the boundaries. Now, if you look at Wilpattu and its boundary right now, that's what it looks like. You've got the forest and you've got farmland. Very, very, and the red line is the end of the national park. So very hard borders. There is no buffer, very little buffer. So the size of the park is effectively much smaller than paper boundary. And what else are we finding? Both studies found evidence of wounded animals. Now, remember, I said sometimes people may say, oh, there's more leopards, that's a good thing. Well, no, maybe not, because there is competition here between leopard and leopard. There are fights going on, possibly. They can't move out, so they have to stay in. Therefore, they have to compete against each other. This is not really a good thing overall. And when you compare it to some of our other studies, what we found is that there's 37% of the animals studied in Wilpattu compared to, for example, 8% in Galloya and 10% in the Central Highlands, which, mind you, you would expect to have more, being very little protected area in the Highlands. And I will discuss that as we go. So we are seeing changes, we're seeing shifts here. We can't just sit on our laurels and think we have this wonderful national park and everything's okay. It isn't, most likely. So let's move now to Galloya. Long ago, I remember my parents always used to tell me that Galloya was the place that everybody went, not Wilpattu, not Yala, and so on. All right. But it still, has very good forest. It has the only true savanna in this country. It's got very good monsoonal forest left. Of course, that's the new, not new anymore, but the road bisecting it and cutting through, which will also bring a whole bunch of other issues. Now, as most of you will know, Galoy is a watershed for the Sri Lanka Samudra, and it was declared a national park to protect that water basin. So we looked at both the national park, which is that, level 1 of protected area, and Namaloya Sanctuary, which is level 2 of protected area. Doesn't have very much protection. There's a lot of cattle and so on. This is how it looks, all right? And we chose these separate areas. Mullegama is interior, very, very little access. We literally had to cut roads to get in there. Nilgala is much more touristy, and Namaloya, like I told you, is on the edge. And those are 2 areas within that we looked at. So what did we find? We did find leopards here, of course, right? As you can see, these are different ranges of different animals. The important thing here, though, is that final column, where we found that the higher number of resident leopards were in the true deep forest and very little on the edges. Luckily, they still are there, which is a good thing. It means they are using that landscape. But once again, we're seeing this preference for being inside, and they are being hemmed in more and more. Now, the reason why numbers here are much less, though, is also because of the habitat type. It's a very different kind of habitat. The prey base is much less. So anyway, naturally, we would expect to have less numbers of leopards. But also possibly it's pointing to something else. So now I want to move across to the Central Highlands, something that we started in 2016. It's a completely unprotected zone in that sense, very different landscape. We don't have those typical big dry zone forests where we think of having wildlife, but it is the highest biodiverse area in this country, the wet zone of Sri Lanka, both lowland and highland. And it harbors all those little species that, Devaka and some in the study, extremely important point endemics that can disappear without anybody knowing. Do we have leopards here, and how are they performing an umbrella role here? Are they or are they not? So before we started work there, just based primarily on, our map and how it looked like, we just roughly mapped this out, thinking that this would be the red lines. Because of the remnant forest patches, these would be the movement corridors for wildlife. These were the refuges for them. Now, additionally, and I will show you how, we have established 2 other conservation zones. They're not protected areas in the sense of national parks or sanctuaries yet, but they're collaborative conservation by landholders. And I will get into that. So most of us think of, the highlands as plantation landscapes, right? Tea. Now, once again, remember here, it's a plantation landscape. Whether it is paddy or tea, it's still plantation. We go back to that island having 80% of plantation. So, of course, there is this going on. We all know that. We have about 8 leopards annually that get killed by humans, usually snares up in this area. But there's something else also happening here that we have discovered. There is another story that occurs on this landscape, and that's what we'll talk a little bit about today. So all these little white dots you're seeing are remote cameras that we have going over about a 500 square kilometer area in here. It's primarily tea. What you're seeing is the Mausakale Reservoir and the Castle Reservoir. Now remember that all our hydroelectricity is garnered from this. So the remnant forest here are the watershed. Like Galoya was the watershed for Sri Lanka Samudra, this is the watershed for these 2 very, very important hydroelectric reservoirs. And what did we find? Some of you have already seen this, so I'll be quite quick. This was the first male that we came across. To be honest, when we started, we didn't expect anything. We had no idea what we were, going to find. It was basically like just throwing spaghetti on the floor and seeing what happens. But unbelievably, this is what we found. We found the same animal moving through this landscape. Okay, and that's a very minimum home range. We know now, and I will show you that it's much bigger than this, but it wasn't the only animal on the landscape. There were other males right neighboring. So quite a lot happening on this landscape, not just tea plucking going on. And the triangles that you see here are the females. Now, the interesting thing here, if you will notice, is that they have chosen to reside along the ridge line that connects Cotton Plains side and Lakshapan side, right? and along the bottom a peak wilderness sanctuary, which is this dark green at the bottom. Whereas the males, as you saw, had to move through. Remember, that's the way their social structure is. But the females have smartly decided to reside where it's safest and get the most of what they can for their cubs. So as you can see here, there's a male range that encompasses the females, but very few females that come within the tea estate landscape. So then what? So we mapped out that ridge. These, what you see in white, are the remnant forest patches or land that's, quite good mixed landscape, wilderness and other release tea, eucalyptus, so on. And that's the corridor, the first of these corridors that we were able to identify and get collaborative conservation on. We've got someone here who's also a landholder adjacent to this, who is, part and parcel of this. So we now then moved that and replicated it. We scaled it up and we went along to the further ridge along, not just only the ridge, the further area. So, and we looked to see what was happening there. Very similar, L-bed the ridge. That's what we came up with. All one plantation company, Haley's Kelani Valley Plantations, was much quicker as a result, whereas the other one, we had 5 PLCs and 13 estates. Here we had 7 estates, one company, quick, wham, bam, signed the agreement. L-bed the ridge corridor is established. So the idea here now then, also as you can see, all those where we've had leopard, right? All those little colored spots. And that's how we've been able to basically follow them and find out where we need to target for conservation. So it's fast, it's quick for us to do this. So, and obviously we spoke about the umbrella concept. It means that the guys are the wildlife there. We know that, right? So, years ago, you talked to planters from, way before and even more recently, everybody knew there were leopards on the landscape. Everybody knew that. They always in the night passing by and so on. But I don't think we really understood what was going on. So we have females living and breeding. We've been monitoring these populations since 2016. We've got multiple cubs coming through. This is not music I put on, this is natural. This is the music coming across the mountain from some festival that was occurring at a tea community. And this female and her 2 cubs. Now we know that she is actually the cub of another female that we monitored first. And now she's having cubs in the adjacent land. So they're still maintaining that same landscape of how the social structure is, even though there aren't these huge protected areas here. So what do we also know? We know that at any given time on Peak Ridge Forest Corridor, the first one, we have about 10 to 15 resident animals. We've got about 2 to 4 sets of cubs, and we've got about 3 to 4 of those young transients that I talked about who have to navigate through this land. On L-bed the Ridge, we've actually got a little more. We've got 15 of them because that also, connects a much better forest in a sense. We've got 5 sets of cubs, we've got 6 transients. And this is at any given time on the landscape within these conservation zones. We know from diet analysis that there is wild prey. We know that they are consuming 89% wild prey and only 11% of domestic dog and cat. And this information is vital because we can talk to the communities, we can tell them when they're upset that their dog was taken or they're scared that their child is going to go. We can tell them for sure here that's not the case. Yes, everybody remembers their dog being taken and we'll talk about it. Yes, it's reported. Of course, if my dog was taken, I would be upset. But the data is showing us that there is still wild prey here. And the other biodiversity is still managing to survive. So using how the leopard navigates the landscape to target these conservation areas is an ideal solution here on these landscapes. I also wanted to touch a little bit here about how the leopard is actually naturally coexisting with the human species there. this is what you see of movement of leopards. You can see a flat line at the bottom on this landscape. They are almost 100%, 99% nocturnal. Leopards are nocturnal, yes, we know that, but also we see them in the daytime, right? Especially in protected areas in the dry zone. So there's a comparative to Vilpattu, for example, right? You can see there is that flat line there. Then they get active. So again, they are selecting themselves to stay hidden during the time when humans are on the landscape. So this is again something we need to therefore learn from ourselves. We need our communities to realize that as night falls, we have to be vigilant because leopards are going to come out. Because in the daytime, they aren't coming out. They're giving us the rule of the land. So this is all data that feeds into all of that. So that's called temporal niche partitioning, all right, where they choose time periods to move through. These are remote cameras that have been there for years. And what you will see is within minutes, within hours, half an hour or so on, a human is walking and a leopard is walking. Okay, repeatedly we have this. And no incidents occur. I know, I have walked and I know a leopard has been right there and it just retreats, waits, we walk by and it comes out again. So it is a naturally retreating animal in that sense. And this is all information that's really good to pass on to communities. What about long-term monitoring? You know, sometimes I think, oh my God, we've been there since 2016, what's going on? And then we get this kind of information, and we know why long-term monitoring is important. So these, again, are females that have resided there for a long time. We can look there for demographics at tenure of the land. Dry zone area is the same as in a protected area. Us to therefore think about protection side of things. So this was Olivia. We had her as a cub in 2016. And then again in 2020, we've had her in between. I'm just showing you, time series. She's courting a male here, and then she had cubs. This is Nino, who was born on Peak Ridge Forest Corridor, and he's a resident there. So what this tells us is that it's not only the ridges that are important, it is also those in-between areas that they require safe passage. So that is something again to consider. And as they go along, obviously they have to prey, they have to eat. So there are other species there. There is wildlife there we need to figure out. This is QT, who came onto PRFC, checked it out for a little while, left, and went on to Elbether and settled. So just interesting how they're using the landscape. This was that first animal I showed you. We had on the landscape moving around. Some of you may know him. We had him, as you can see up there first, very, young and strong and very well-built male. He was a resident, we know that. Then, as you can see down here, in 2019, he's looking much older. So we are also seeing here how to age animals. We contribute internationally too to this kind of thing because it's very few non-protected populations of such an elusive species is monitored for so long. Then we had him mating again in 2021. Let's say he was 4 years in 2016. In 2021, he's still going strong. But then end of 2022, he disappeared. We thought, okay, he's now at that age where we would probably expect him to die or move off to marginal lands because we knew young males were coming, for example. We know Nino was coming in. There were other males coming in. And we knew that. Now, amazingly enough, in the end of 2023, another colleague of us who does some camera work in a whole other area up north, this is quite a bit, about 10 kilometers away, picked up these animals, sent it to us, and lo and behold, it was Arnold. And he's still there, and he has mated again, and that female has cubs, whether he's or not, we don't know. But this tells us how old an animal can survive in the wild too, right? So it gives us a lot of information. So this is now, we are scaling this up across the entire of the Central Highlands. What you see here, I hope you can see here. So you have Elbether Ridge in yellow, Peak Ridge in the red. We are looking at this next ridge up to Potagala with the purple line. Up there is Peradeniya. We started work from Peradeniya campus. We're assessing their forests and then coming all the way down to Pendle. And then there are more here that we will hope to look at. So looking to see how the Central Highlands can be protected in a variety of ways. The landscape is very divided. We can't have these huge, big protected areas, but we can have these little patches and corridors of connecting conservation areas. So this is Peradeniya very quickly. I just wanted to show you all something new that we've been doing. That's Victoria Rantambe. We're also working there. We did the first GPS release actually of a leopard that was caught in a snare and survived, and they operated on the animal. He survived the whole thing, and we followed and released across the water. We got just published that out. Actually, it was amazing the information we got from there. But looking all over at different landscapes to see how this is happening and working. So Peradeniya, again, you can see campus land. Some of you may be familiar. So we're looking at this ridgeline again, but we're also looking wider because we've understood now that the leopard is not only using ridges, but also other areas. This is just to show you some amazing stuff that we're finding. This young male is a cub female that resides on University of Peradeniya lands up in the high forest. And this animal, again a young male, resides within a pepper estate, an area that we never thought we would find leopard, because if you look at Peradeniya now down to Nilam Bay and so on, further down to Pedro, it's a very different habitat, small holders, not large art pieces, small estates, all divided, different kind of agriculture. And we thought, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Is this an area that, is where they're going to get cut, where the, bottleneck is going to occur, where they're not going to be able to disperse? So we wanted to really look, we are looking right now to see what's happening. So we're finding that they are smart. They're using wherever they can, however we can. We're working here with private landowners, and we're finding them in, areas that you wouldn't really have thought. So to finally end with, coming back to iconic Yala National Park, is of course leopards. Everybody thinks Yala. So of course you have to put it in there, okay? But we're not working in the park anymore. We are working outside the park. Because remember, we talked about buffers and we talked about smaller patches of forest and how they navigate this landscape, okay? So that is the so-called buffer zone of the southern end of this national block 1. And that's Nimalava, where you guys will all drive through when you go. And I'm sure nobody even thinks about that forest and what could be there. And what does this mean? If you look very close at it, so I'm just zooming it up there. We've got the hotel zone. That's how we labeled it, because that's where all the hotels are outside there. It's also got the electric fence, as you can see, hard border up there. And again, you can see the difference, right? All agriculture on this side, park on that side. Very, very hard borders. Remember Vilpattu and what happened there. And then we've got Nimalava over here and Saltons all in the middle. So we're monitoring this area. What are we finding? There is leopard occupancy. But the interesting thing is we're having a high number of animals that we are only monitoring once. Less so where they're staying and residing. The turnover is quite high. We do have animals there and we do have residents. This again is at any given time. We've been there for some years now. And we are finding that the sex ratio of the resident adults are 2.5 to 1. So a little less than we saw otherwise. Normally it's 1 male to 3 to 5. What's happening here? A relative abundance is just something you can use to compare across very quickly to see how many times you catch a leopard on your remote camps, right? And you do some stats on that. So we are finding, yes, we do have in the Yala Southern Buffer, we are having an abundance index there, but much lower. For example, much lower than up in the highlands. Now, this is Yala National Park, right there, one of our big protected areas, yet much less of an RAI than up in the tea estate landscapes. Namaloya Sanctuary, even less. Anyway, remember, we expected to find lower numbers, but still very low. Okay, space use. How are leopards using this? Equally between these two patches here is what we found. The busiest camera, funnily enough, is on this private land here, but it's adjacent to the electric fence. So probably meaning we are thinking that is a route that they're dispersing through, coming out of block 1 and going out there because there's good forest there, there's bear, there's everything there, and then having to navigate this other extremely risky area to come here or disperse further. The RAI here, as we thought would be the case and as it's showing, is much less in this buffer area, which is so cut up. You know, we first worked in Yala in 2000, 25 years ago, and we compared the buffer now to then. It is unbelievable how much it has changed, as I'm sure many of you will know. So this is expected, right? So we are seeing much less in those areas than in the two forested sort of areas. So we started here with this young animal where we cross-identified her with a very frequent photographer who goes in there, because we got her down at Nimalava as a young resident. And we cross-identified the fact that her natal area was up in block 1. She was born there. How she navigated, we didn't know yet at that time. Now we're starting to understand. So what you have here is another female. Then this is her range. So she is, remember, this is outside in the buffer. And this is how she utilizes her range, right? She's going across the hotel zone, Nimalava, and the farmland area. Very risky. This is another female where we had for a long time just in this straight line, as you can see, yellow line, probably trying to figure out how to get out. It's a female, remember. Normally it's young males that have to get out. But here we're finding young females going out. What does this mean? Huge high density numbers coming out of Yala. That's not a good thing. Everybody wants to sell it saying Yala, best place in the world to see leopards, Kumana, second best. Is this a good thing? Possibly not, because this is what's happening. They have to leave when otherwise they wouldn't have. So this animal actually started off up there and now is residing down in Nimalava. Again, another, so that's the movement that you're seeing there. This is a male having to range far and wide in the very, very risky area of this buffer to access these two females, right? He overlays these two females. This is another animal after that very first animal that we did this again. Again, a group of photographers, we cross-identified natal area, and we found this animal residing in Nimalava. And so we started this one. We are now looking at huge amounts of data where we're cross-referencing animals within the park and outside. How is this being navigated? So very quickly, these are just some of the animals I wanted to show you, the lovely pictures being from all the lovely huge lenses of photographers, and ours are all remote camera usually, okay? So here you can see, born in 2017 inside of the park, block 1, 2019 in Nimalava. 2022, born inside, 2023, outside. All, please note, they're females. A male, born inside, 2019, 2021, outside. 2022 to 2025, again, we're finding this. So it's a pattern, right? Really, I'm showing you. Again, born in 2018 inside, cross-reference to now living outside. Similar, again, what we're having here in different areas. Hotel zone, we're finding. So these are all young dispersers, right? Males and females, and how they're navigating. What about range shifts? Is that also occurring? I showed you in the highlands how we actually had animals moving completely. So we're finding that too now. We've got this animal that was in 2017, and in 2023, we picked her up, mind you, a female, living outside here. This young male straddles both inside and outside, lives, of course. I mean, you know, our boundaries, they don't know, right? So it's straddling. So again, just trying to understand here that these animals look at it as one collective landscape. It's a landscape level that we need to look at. We cannot just say, this is the border and that's it. These animals are showing us how they're using the landscape. Straddlers again here. 2020 inside, 2022 outside as well as inside. So they're straddling. 2021, we've got now outsiders. Animals that live only outside, not inside. So we all drive down that tarred road, we enter those big gates and we think, right, leopard, let's look for leopard. You're going right by animals that are living outside and nobody knows, and they'll all disappear because nobody thinks that they are even there. So these animals live outside all the time. They're not inside the park at all. So that's really the sum and wrap up of everything. Landscape conservation is a balancing act, as we all know, as I hope I've shown you all. There's a lot of things to consider. You do one thing and it can go down the other way. You do the other thing and it can go the other way. Having this information is vital. It's extremely time dependent. It's multi-scale. I hope I've shown that from all the different studies across the country. And it needs multiple actors because it's multi-scale. So it's not just, this person does this, that department does that, and so on. Collaborative work is essential for this kind of thing. And not just to get the data, but then to use it for actual policy and planning. How are we going to, where are we going to put our roads? Where are we going to put the next housing scheme? Where is agriculture going to go? All these questions, we have a, planning, national planning division. Finally, this data is going there. How it's going to be used, we don't know, but we need to, again, feed into that and be part of all of this. So to end it all, I hope that I have been able to convey how the leopard can be an ideal proxy here on this island for conservation at a landscape. Thank you. And I just actually wanted to say none of this work would be possible without all of our multiple partners. I talked about having partnerships, and 100% this kind of work requires that. So thanks to all of them. That's it. Any questions? I don't know if there's time. Yeah. Absolutely. So conservancies, that's what we're looking at. Looking even within the hotel zone to establish it as a conservancy. It's already been put out there. Obviously, with governments changing, land ownership is very difficult. Other countries have this. South Africa has conservancies in this kind of area. So those are the kinds of things that can buffer truly the national park. And then we have sort of safe passage as much as possible to the other areas. So yes, absolutely.
So very different legislated protected area, national park. So is your that this data is then used for some of this stuff to actually get formally set in place, or are you happy with leaving it in this way because arguably you're finding it easier to set your camera shot, do all of that work with this, sometimes less.
Okay, so with the leopard, you still need permits because it's an FFPO protected animal. So it doesn't matter if you're in a national park or outside anywhere. If you want to do this kind of research at this scale, you have to go to the research one. So we still have to do all of that. Ideally, some of those areas should be legislated. However, currently it's plantation land, it's working as is. The leopards and other wildlife are using it as is. So obviously you can't go back in time, you can't remove all the tea and reforest it. So it can stay as is. We are working with, like I showed you, those forest patches to restore areas. So the PLCs are also choosing hectares plots. So we've done a 7 hectare on Dilma's estate. We're doing 21 hectares on another private estate, Kalni Valley. So we've mapped all the areas that can be restored. So that is the way to kind of look at that lens. So we restore where possible, where released tea is, where it's too steep for anything else. Eucalyptus harvesting does occur, and we've actually monitored before harvesting and post-harvest. And leopards and other wildlife are still using the landscape as is. So to get partnerships, obviously you have to think of the fact that these are plantation companies. They do what they do. They are profit oriented, but working to protect as is, to keep as is, and where possible, restore. Some of it is forest department land anyway, so it's okay. Hope that answered.
What are the threats to the population and perhaps those threats people in different environments?
Absolutely. Okay, so we're actually currently doing the first green assessment, which is the parallel to a red list assessment. This is a green status assessment, okay? And our subspecies has been chosen for that. And basically what that does is you have to analyze threats historically. You can go back way far in time or more recently, and then you project. And there's three big components, such as your conservation legacy. So how has Sri Lanka's conservation legacy impacted? How is our conservation dependence going to be? It's just all a scoring, right, that you have to do. And then we future it as well, 10 years and 100 years from. So having looked at this and worked across the country, the threats are varied across provinces. So in the dry zone, you will have one set of threats. In the wet zone, you have another set of threats, right? And that really is the beauty, or I should say the answers we get from working across the country. So therefore, solutions have to be tailor-made. So in the dry zone, for example, direct human threat will be retaliatory killing for taking cattle, poison. Huge amount of poaching of their prey species, but we don't really know. Lots of forest still left. I mean, I shouldn't say lots of forest, but we know what the dry zone forest is like. A leopard can go and die and we wouldn't know. In the wet zone, not so. Much more of a human footprint. In the tea estate land, they actually call it in. So we have data. We don't in the dry zone. In the tea estate lands, it's very different again. It's obvious fragmentation. It's snares. So they put snares for different reasons as opposed to poison. So there's different things like that. But overarchingly, especially for this country, it's habitat fragmentation, loss and fragmentation. So that's the key. No, the other way around. Yeah. Yes. So males base their range on access to females, right? So that they can mate. So their range is going to be much wider because they need to include at least 3 females within their range. Whereas a female is a smaller range because she will only have a range that she can protect that will have enough food for her cubs and that she can defend. Yeah. So could you repeat phrases? Oh, okay. Right. Sorry. So that question was basically about the range sizes of males and females and why the sizing is the way that it is. Sorry? Yes. Yes. Okay. So the question was basically the umbrellas, the talk show, there's a lot of disruption and all that. So really quick answer is that instead of one big umbrella, we're going to be having small umbrellas, right? Much less effective. I always say when we have a huge storm, these stupid little umbrellas we have, I don't know why somebody can't come up with something better, is of no use. We get wet. If it's a small little rain, it's adequate. So the same thing, a disruption, a big disruption will therefore impact not just only the leopard, but all of biodiversity much more because of this disruption in the overall ecosystem. Yeah, does that? Yes. Okay, good question. Okay, so the question was about the prey of the leopard and if it's mainly terrestrial ground-based prey or whether there are arboreal tree-dwelling prey-like primates. Very good question. Definitely primates also. So leopards, I said, are very adaptable and their prey is differing in each of the habitats depending on what's available. So they will take whatever is available. So, for example, in the highlands, we have barking deer and sambar because they're available. But it's black-naped hare that's the main thing in all of the scats, the little, black-naped hare. So it's because it's most available. So that's their additional source of prey. In the, Yala area, for example, it's axis deer because it's freely available. And in Leopard, we found that it's primates. So they are actually there, preying on a lot of primates. It's to do with the habitat type, how they can easily catch primates. I don't know if any of you have seen how a leopard catches a primate. It's pretty amazing. Had a video, but anyway, they scare, they disrupt. So, for example, you have all the monkeys up on the tree, and this leopard will just leap into the tree. And all of the, whether it's talk macaque or a langa, they go crazy and they alarm call, and they literally go mad. They're running all over, they're panicked. So it causes panic, and then one poor primate will fall. That's it. So it's all dependent on the habitat. So again, you asked about solutions. You have to kind of know this in order to then therefore protect the other species as well. So because we know now that they have a very catholic diet and what they're eating in the different habitats, to look at those habitats from a protection perspective as well. Not just the leopard. Where, sorry? Using the leopard? Oh yeah, absolutely. So, actually some of us, our team brought this up on their own, this whole, primate census that's come out and this whole issue. So in some of our awareness programs, they actually on their own told the communities this. Now, so when we go and, we always ask, what's your biggest problem? Usually it is primates, though there are a few other things, not leopards usually. So then, field office was able to explain and say, now see, if this leopard was gone, what do you think will happen to the primates? So yes, it plays a natural role. That's that keystone species, right? Where if you remove this from the entire system, then herbivores their numbers would be much larger. And that then leads to desertification. We don't 100% know if the leopard is a keystone here, because you have to actually remove it from the system to know. So hopefully we'll never know. But that is its sort of its pest control side of it. Absolutely. So interesting. I was wondering if that was going to come up. So our diet studies show something interesting. The leopard actually does not favor wild boar. Probably meaning it takes wild boar, but not in relation to its availability, right? Probably because it's a dangerous prey species. That's solely why. But yes, absolutely, right? It is 100% controlling some amount of wild boar as well. Sorry, what? Mortality and natality rates. Okay. Yes, but the unknown is there because, so, okay, we showed you, right, some there about how we can say where their natal areas are and then we're finding them. The unknown factor that we can't catch from camera traps is when they disperse. So we don't know, we only know what's being recruited into the population we're studying. So get those for that particular area. But where we don't have cameras, we can't get them. So that's a little bit of a, so you've got to put way more of this in that sense. Did that answer that?
Yeah. Based on the levels that are lost in samples, is there a strong correlation on males, females, age?
Yes. So we've got either young males or old males. So the question was basically, the earlier question was about whether there was a, we were able to say from remote cameras, natal and what did you ask me? Rates of death and recruitment, right? Births. The other question was correlation between snares and sex of the leopard, age sex. So yes, we do see some where we have young males or old males. Yes, absolutely. Because they have to navigate, like I said, they go through the risky areas, right? So it's in these areas that you're going to have snares usually. Although we had a master's student a few years back who did some work on this, her master's was on that, where we looked at where leopards were actually found dead and what is the landscape. So the interesting thing is that they're actually found in forested areas. So snares transcend time as well as space in that sense, because you can lay a snare 10 years ago, or let's say 5 years ago in a forested area, and it's still somewhat active and the leopard will die in it, right? So that's the problem with snares. Actually, that's the insidiousness of it, that it's lying there in wait all the time. So it doesn't necessarily have to be only in a risky area at all. It's actually in forested areas too, because people go out and lay snares there, right? Specifically.
There was a question on the group call. Do they not eat peacocks? Because peacocks are.
Okay, now, yeah. I mean, interesting. Do they eat peacocks? Yes, we've had a few samples where they have, but not to a huge extent in that sense so far from our scat analysis. Probably not, I think, because where peacocks are becoming a problem are more in urban areas and leopards aren't there, right? I mean, we've got peacocks here on campus, as you all know, and in our homes, on SLTA and on everywhere, right? So there's no leopards here. Peacock, you mean? Yeah. So. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, thank you for the questions. Thank you. And sorry about the technical glitches, but I hope you all stayed on and listened.